If you're a mid-level to C-suite leader who wants to own your growth and figure out your next small, brave move to achieve your leadership goals, you are in the right place. Welcome to the Small Brave Moves podcast, a weekly deep dive on how to be braver in leadership and in life for exceptional results. I'm your host, Nicole Bianchi, best-selling author, certified master executive coach, NSA certified speaking professional, chief bravery officer, and tough talk expert. If you're ready to become a better, braver, and more authentic leader, let's dive in. Welcome back to the Small Brave Moves podcast. Today, I'm beyond excited to introduce our guest, Joe Thornton. Joe is a powerhouse CEO and entrepreneur with an incredible 40 years of experience in retail, executive management, and human resources. He's led large-scale strategies, taken on significant P&L responsibilities, and has an impressive background in operations, franchising, consulting, project management, and so much more. But Joe's expertise doesn't stop there. He's also a published author with not one, but 3 compelling books: The Depths of Mediocrity, Eliminating Indifference, The Power of Or, Choosing and Doing What Matters Most, and The Hostility of Change, Breaking Through Deep-Seated Barriers. Each of these titles reveals Joe's depth of thought leadership and passion for challenging mediocrity and inspiring bold leadership. Currently, Joe is the Chief Executive Officer at Scooters Coffee, where he's helping to drive impressive growth across the U.S. with over 800 locations in 30 states and still counting. His journey, built on small, brave moves, serves as an inspiration for all of us. Let's get to it. Joe, welcome to the Small Brave Moves podcast. I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. I would love for you to share with the audience just a little bit about what you're up to right now and what you're doing in your role at Scooters.
Well, Nicole, I'm the Chief Executive Officer for Scooters Coffee, based here in Omaha, Nebraska. And I absolutely love what I'm doing. I've got this amazing leadership team and a brand that's on the rise. We have 806 locations across the US and 30 states. So a lot has happened, but so much more ahead. So I am really enjoying this moment.
Talk to me about the small, brave moves that it took to get where you're at today.
Wow, there's been a lot. I think some of it is remembering that most of our life is made of small, brave moves, personal or professional. And I've had these moments in time, first of all, just incredible leaders. I think everyone on their leadership journey needs other people to help them along the way. But so much of it for me is that at a young age, starting out in retail, I couldn't dream this big. So it's been small moves the entire way. But as I took one small, brave move, it led to the confidence to take the next one and take the next one. And to that point, it's also helped me enjoy every part of the journey and not always look forward to the next thing. There's a temptation there, but just being present in the thing that you're doing arguably is what opens the door for future opportunities.
It's such a good reminder. And think about, is there one particular move you made that stood out for you that was this pivotal moment where you were like, I understand?
Yes, it was. It was early 2009. I was a vice president for Starbucks. And I, of course, if you remember at that time, we're in the throes of an economic downturn, pretty severe. And the Starbucks business was an interesting case study because at that point, from the time they went public to that moment, they had 187 straight months of positive growth. I mean, just unprecedented. And that's with all the store openings. And so to say that we were unprepared for an economic downturn is an understatement. And so I remember I had a visit. I was in Dallas, Texas at the time, and I got a call from the president of Starbucks, and he says, Howard Schultz, the CEO, is in Dallas visiting a board member, and he'd like to visit with you tomorrow. That was the notice, 24 hours. And I said, sure, I'll be ready for it. I learned in my career to always have a presentation ready for any emergency. So I was ready.
Wow.
And his goal was to visit 3 stores and then get on a plane and go back to Seattle. And I said to him, I said, well, I think market visits are important. and you should always have context beforehand. And so we should do a business review before we go out and visit stores. And it was kind of an interesting moment where it kind of felt like I was telling him what to do, which I was. He agreed to it. We had the business review. The visits went great. Off he went. I didn't hear anything about the visit for a couple of weeks. And so I wasn't really sure how to think about that. But when I did finally get the call, it was that was the best field visit he had ever had to that point, saying a lot. And so it led to him deciding to bring the board meeting out of Seattle for the first time to Dallas, Texas. And this again at the lowest point in the company in terms of performance because of the economy. And I remember talking to the president at the time and I said, well, if the board meeting's coming to Dallas, I want to be a part of the board meeting. Can I attend? And he took a few days and called me back and says, yes. I took it further, Nicole. I then reached back out and said, well, if I'm going to be there, I'd like to present something. Can I get 30 minutes on the agenda? And he thought about it a few more days. He called back and said, yes. So I ended up presenting to this Starbucks board, and it ended up being the most pivotal moment in my career. It established a relationship with Howard, and it elevated my career at Starbucks. That wasn't the intention. It was just simply I saw opportunities in the business I wanted to talk about. And
Right.
ultimately, it led to a pivotal moment of growth.
So, what a great example of three asks right in a row. And the first one being to do the market visit differently, right? That you had an idea. And so, I
Yeah.
want to talk a little bit about each one and the power of the ask because 73% of us wait to ask for something until it's almost too late. And here you are right in the beginning, like, let's do this. And it's a great example of a how we work conversation. You're beginning to shape like how you want to do things and the relationship you want to have with Howard. When I think about that first ask, I'm curious that deep dive in the beginning and then going through each of the stores, what kind of conversation did it lead to at the end of those 3 store visits that would have been different than had you not done that deep dive in the beginning?
Yeah, I believe that context matters, and I believed it at that moment. So being able to set up the performance of the region, the performance of the stores, who the store manager is as a person, and what's the best thing to focus on in that store, it really set those leaders up for success in the store. And that was really my most important point to emphasize is because I knew their level of nervousness.
Yeah.
So how do I set them up for success was part of that. What it ultimately led to is a much richer dialogue in the stores. And then a basic at the end of the day, which is this is what we said you would see, and then this is what you saw.
Yeah.
So the confirmation link was really, really important.
What a great move from a transparency standpoint and a bold choice, I'm sure, in the moment when you're like, hold on, versus allowing it to just unfold and then wishing you would have, right, left it to chance, something else to do. And then to attend the board meeting and then to present at the board meeting. Talk to me about what mindset did you have to hold when you made that ask from a small brave move standpoint? Like what was so that others that are thinking about, do I make the ask? Do I not make the ask? What was most important for you to what mindset did you hold?
Well, I could see that, certainly the performance of the company, we all had opportunities. Now I was performing a little bit better than the rest of the system, but true teamwork is you bring everyone along. So there was a bit of that in the psychology of it all. But the bigger piece was that I felt like I had an answer that no one else had. Now, whether I was right or not, I was willing to put that on the table. And so I do believe as well, the intentionality of the board meeting coming to my market was too great of a temptation to pass up.
Yeah.
And so that ask was out of pure curiosity and this opportunity that presented itself. But I'll go to the third point, which is then the presentation itself. We were my market was performing at a higher level, but again, I thought there was more out there. And so I made this commitment at the board meeting and I introduced this philosophy without getting into all the details, but it's basically a 75-50-25 philosophy on how to deliver gross margin, controllable contribution, and ultimately profit margin. And we were nowhere near that number, but I said, we'll deliver it in 3 years, committed to the board. And then when I left, I had this out of body experience. Like, what did I just do? But one of the lessons though, and I think it's with anything in our life, It's if you feel strongly about something, not only do you commit to it, you need to declare it.
Yeah.
You need to tell it to someone. So now you're accountable to delivering it.
Yes.
And so fast forward, ultimately, I did deliver on that goal within 2.5 years of the 3-year plan. And it did help lift the rest of the US. And for years, that story was told by others.
Wow.
So it helped my career in a way that I didn't anticipate. But my DNA is that I simply can't walk by things that aren't right. And if I know that I have the answer, I want to share it with the world.
I love that. And it's great example of being curious. A lot of times when I'm in coaching conversations and somebody's stuck, I ask the question like, what are you most curious about? If you could ask anything in this moment of the person you want to have this conversation with, what would it be? And my guess for you in that moment was attending the board meeting and then not only that, but presenting and then getting them to see something different, which is a big move. I love that. I want you to think about so it this that was such a powerful example of some things going right. Think about tough talks and a tough talk you had to have along the way in your leadership journey.
Yeah, earlier in my career, before that point, I was a senior director in a company, and I had a very, describe it as emotive leader. They use emotion often, many times in the business in a different way that I had seen before. But as I've said often, any strength overutilized can tip over and become a weakness.
Yes.
And there was those moments where that emotion led to combativeness.
Mhm.
And so there was a moment out in the market where we had a disagreement in public in front of some of the other people that reported to me on the team and a couple of peers. And it was an awkward moment for everyone involved. Um, and so we left that moment. We flew back to the headquarters a couple days later. And I went into the office and closed the door behind me and said, we need to work this out. And I remember the leader saying to me, if you have an issue with me publicly, you need to resolve it privately.
Mhm.
And my response was, if you bring an issue publicly, I'm going to resolve it publicly. And
Fair.
so, we agreed to disagree. And, I was thinking about the shadow that that was creating for everyone else in that moment, not just self-serving. It's that, again, I can't walk by poor behavior and people aren't behaving correctly. I'm inclined to call it out.
Yeah. Right. And if you allow it to happen, right, it becomes slowly becomes the norm and
Yeah.
becomes the way people do things and it's acceptable and then causes a whole nother level of dysfunction. I love that, and I think about so when we have the how we work conversation, the first of the 5 tough talks, it's getting really clear on, "If I need to give you feedback or if I have to challenge you, what's the best way to do it?" Or, "Joe, if I'm working for you and you're my CEO and I'm seeing something you're not seeing, what's the best way to share it?" So when I think about those kind of questions and setting up rhythms, rules, and routines in your current leadership role, what are some of the moves you make to have the how we work conversation so that your leadership team is in alignment? Or if they get out of alignment, they're able to get back in alignment?
Yeah, Nicole. So this has been an interesting case study as I've come into the business. And as it stands today, with the 8 executive leaders I have around the table, 4 were here before I arrived at the company 2 years and a couple months ago, and 4 I've hired since. So there's always, and I believe a perfect scenario is that you are bridging the old and the new with the leadership team. I've always said when the first year in a role, if you change everything, you've gone too far. And if you change nothing, you haven't gone far enough. So always trying to find that balance. And I feel like we've established a good balance. But 2 things I've had to be really intentional about. One is from my experiences in previous companies, executive teams don't actually spend enough time together. Some will meet once a week for an hour or every other week for a couple of hours. We meet every week for 4 hours and we run out of time every single time. There are enough topics to talk about, partially because we're a high growth organization, but there's also this element of if we are sharing and building as a team, it also cuts down the amount of extra emails and separate meetings all throughout the week. But the biggest piece is I believe as a leader, the strongest skill that we should possess is to be an inspiration.
Mhm.
I mean, we have to inspire people as a leader. The strongest team attribute, I believe, is collaboration.
Mm.
And as I often say to the team, and they probably get tired of hearing me say, the smartest person in the room is the room.
Yeah.
And it's just using that collective brain power. So part of the other part of building this team is we did an offsite meeting a couple months into formation. And I asked them to do an activity that I'd only done once in my career before, and I did not know how this was going to turn out with the new team. It's called a timeline activity. It's simply everyone going to a separate place in the hotel, taking a piece of flip chart paper and thinking about all of their experiences, high and low, drawing a line and putting the positive above the line, the negative below the line. And in any way that they want to describe this journey, whether it's childhood, adult, or the things that they want to discuss, how do they share that back with the rest of the team?
Mhm.
And so we came back the second day and did this share back, and I was blown away with the level of experiences that they were willing to share. Things that we would have never known about each other unless it came through this point of sharing. And one attribute that came out of all of this is that they'd all lived through some pretty traumatic things. And that level of resilience is part of what makes up the DNA of an effective C-level leader.
Mhm.
It draws out more empathy because they've lived through some things, but it also helps with problem solving.
Yeah.
So all that to say, building a team is a lot of work,
Yeah.
but it's the right work because ultimately, when we're making decisions, even when we don't agree, we have better context on why people believe what they believe.
What a great example of investing in the relationships because the results will soon follow from the 4 hours, right, a week to meet and go deep to the offsite and pulling in authentic. That's a great example of an authentic self exercise. And what I love when you shared that story with me a couple months ago, I remember sitting here thinking, like, so many people don't give themselves permission to experiment, right? You've done that exercise once, and here you are with this newer leadership team, four that have been there a while, for that, and you're really focused on building the trust, cohesion, and vulnerability, right, of the team. Very intentional move, but you weren't sure how it was going to work out. And so
Uh,
the permission to experiment is such a great, small, brave move. And you set the stage for them to bring their most authentic self, right, to that conversation, which then built connections. And I think about, again, investing in the relationships, the results will soon follow. So I love that story, which reminds me of one of our mindsets, behaviors, and habits of a braver leader is that hope driven, right? And the hope driven mindset is that positive expectation of a better future. And then it's the motivation to go reach that desired outcome. Some people will talk about, well, hope isn't a strategy. And I'm like, well, hope driven is different,
yes.
right? Because you see that positive. When I talk about hope driven, what does that mean for you?
Hope is so powerful to me. It's the one of the things I've often said is that I'm very, very careful to strip hope away from anyone because what I've said is sometimes hope is all a person has because we all start from a different point in life that we all interpret hope the same way. But it can be strategic to your point if a hope driven ideology matters to people. And if you can get people from one place to another using hope, there's some benefits to that. The reason why I think it's so important because I'll look at the other side of it. I've seen hopelessness.
Mm,
And hopelessness to me is that you could tell people there's the door to walk through and they don't have the mental acuity to walk through it.
mm,
I remember speaking to a class of students, my son's class, oldest son, when he was in high school. And if I had ranked his high school with all the high schools in the US, they would be median, right in the middle, in terms of income, in terms of demographics, in terms of scores for the school. So I thought this was a quote unquote good school. And I remember talking to this class, and there was such hopelessness. And I remember answering a few questions, but my takeaway from that day was two things. One, if this level of hopelessness existed in this school, I can't imagine what the other 49 percentile looks like below it.
mhm,
The other is that I realized at that point in my life, I had had some success and developed in my career, and I had forgotten what it felt like to feel hopeless.
mm,
And I felt embarrassed that I had not. stayed connected to that feeling, and I vowed to never do that again.
So that's a great one to think about for our listeners. How do you stay connected to that feeling?
Well,
What
there's
can
2
you do?
things.
Yeah.
Well, when I started Scooter's Coffee, I'd been here for 5 days,
Okay.
and I went and visited one of our warehouses here in Omaha across town, and I had sent out starting on day 2, I'd sent out a daily inspirational message. And when I arrived at the warehouse, I ran into this employee named Chris. Had never met him before, and he said, "You know, I love this message you're sending out to everyone in the company because all of our employees, regardless of position."
Okay.
And he said, but it would be cool if you just called it a daily cup of Joe. Play on the coffee word." And I said, "That is brilliant."
Oh,
So this next day, it became Daily Cup of Joe. And I've sent one out every day for the last 2+ years. And part of the reason I do it is it's not work related, it's life related.
yeah.
And I remember walking with a director who had the courage to walk with me about a year and a half ago. I'd probably been sitting him out for 6 or 7 months. And she said, asking for a friend, she said, you send these messages out and you send them on Saturday and Sunday as well. And some of us feel like that means we're supposed to be working.
Mm,
And it's like, that's a great question. Let me tell you why I'm sending them out on the weekends. One, because our stores are open every day.
yeah.
Secondly, we do have warehouse employees and bakery and delivery employees who are working on the weekend. I said, but the biggest part is that life doesn't take a day off.
Mm,
So I'm sending them every day. So that's the one of the ways I stay connected. I don't know what I'm going to send until I wake up that morning. So it's a moment of reflection every day
wow.
because I do want the message to have some relevance to the day that's coming ahead.
Relevance, and it comes from the heart is what I hear
Yeah.
also. And so for those listening, Joe, I love that you're doing the daily message. You also have 3 books that are powerful leadership books. You have The Power of Or, The Depths of Mediocrity, and The Hostility of Change. So listeners can get those on Amazon if they would like to
Yes.
explore one of those topics further. And I love that you really model and emulate not just small, brave moves, but bravery plus leadership and being a braver leader and the intentionality of our mindset and how we live our daily lives. So think about we have a large, our listener base is very much leaders, C-suite leaders, leading teams, businesses. And so what is the first small, brave move you would suggest to any of our leaders out there if they want to be where you are in your leadership journey?
Yeah, Nicole, I'd say you have to set a big goal. But the second part of this is you must declare it.
Yes.
I think that's where the difference is. And so I can remember in one of my company changes, I was coming in as a vice president. I had aspirations for the future. So I set a 7-year development goal. And one of the reasons that I did that is that I knew it would force me to do some things I wouldn't otherwise do. So often we build our development just for the next job. And I was building it for the long term. So I think sometimes if you feel comfortable setting the goal, then it's not a big goal, right? It's kind of arbitrary, but there is something to that. But whatever that goal is, you got to tell someone about it. And the scariest moment for me as it relates to that was writing the first book to
Oh,
actually go through the process. And there's the mental part of it, which is, do I really have something to say? And is it going to be interesting to anyone? But once I got past all of that and the logistical part of setting up the LLC and the formation of the book and all those things, then now you're going to put it out in the universe. And
yeah,
that first post, I sat on it for days before I hit send that this new book is coming to the world because once I hit it, I can't take it back. And
right.
that's just a different level of commitment, and I think that's important for people to do when they set big goals.
I don't know if you know this, but 2% of people that say they are going to write a book actually write a book. Only
Wow.
2%.
I had never
Yes,
heard that.
2%.
Wow.
I learned that when I was writing Small Brave Moves, that it's only 2%. And
Wow.
then the other one that pops up for me that I think you're really talking a lot about is if we are 63% likely to achieve a goal if we put it out in the world. So if we put voice to it, like you're talking about, and then 95% likely to achieve it if you tell somebody like an accountability partner, we call it swim buddies in Small Brave Moves. But if you have somebody that's willing to run alongside of you to help you in those moments, who's unselfishly fired up during the great moments, and then willing to pick you up when you're not achieving those growth areas or you need some help. And so it changes everything. So thank you for sharing that as well. So what's your next goal and what's the next small brave move you need to make to get there?
Yeah, there's two things I would say. On the professional side, it's brand strategy. That's the next small brave move for Scooter's Coffee, which is I was just in New York last week with a roundtable of other CEOs. Wonderful, wonderful conversation we had all day long. But it is interesting as we introduced ourselves at the beginning of the day and our concept, a little bit of our journey, most of them around the table were fairly small concepts. They might be bigger in size of the footprint, but just in number of stores, 80, 150, 200. And then I get around to the table for me to introduce myself. And I said, we have 806 stores. And some of them were like, we've never heard of you. Now, granted, we're not in New York or on the East Coast, but the best brands, their legacy goes far beyond where they geographically operate. And so that's the work that we have to do at Scooter's Coffee is tell people who we are. Personally, for me, it's writing the next book. So I'm working on it. And it's a departure from the first three, which are mostly leadership driven, heavy storytelling. This one is a fiction book.
Ooh, say more. Can
So
you give us a teaser? A little
I
piece of it?
I can. The working title is The Chaos of Fog, but the storyline is a murder trial where two undefeated attorneys, a prosecutor and defendant, and it's kind of the crime of the century. But on the way to this trial, something else happens. I can't give away the something else and
Yeah.
turns it on its head. And so I'm still kind of forming the entire synopsis of that. So
So I'm
that'll
curious,
be fun.
nonfiction to fiction, what's driving that for you?
Yeah, I think some of it is I've always wanted to write a fiction book, and I do feel like the three leadership books in somewhat of a trilogy form finally got out all the things in my head that I've been carrying around for years,
Yeah.
and so it feels like that story is quote unquote complete for now, and
Yeah.
it's a good opportunity to pivot to fiction.
My husband told me when I wrote Small Brave Moves that any good book is turned into a movie. Now, I don't think
Mm.
Small Brave Moves will be, but my hope for you with this fiction movie maybe is turn it into a movie, question
I
mark?
totally expect that.
Yeah.
In fact, one of the things I said to my wife, I haven't declared to the world, but I guess I would be if I said it on here, is in a perfect world, the book is interesting enough
Yeah.
that the screenplay develops and someone would turn it into a movie, and I'll be sitting at the Oscars in 7 or 8 years from now, so
Oh, I
that'd be
love it.
great.
I love it. Well, hey, we are here. We heard that goal put out in the world, and we are cheering you on every step of the way, Joe. If listeners want to follow you and just follow along with what you share, what's the best way to engage with you?
Yeah, Joe Robert Thornton on, Instagram or Facebook, or the website, which is joerobertthornton.com. You can also purchase the books there, but also just look at some of the background and services because I do look for opportunities to still provide any inspiration I can to other leaders, to other businesses, or just people that are working to improve themselves like I've, gone through my career journey.
That's great. Thank you, Joe, so much for taking time to join us and share more about the small, brave moves you make. And we know bravery plus leadership creates a competitive advantage for us as leaders. And we appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you, Nicole.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of the Small Brave Moves podcast. If you're wanting to take this work even deeper, I'm here to help. From engaging in inspirational keynote speeches to transformational coaching and workshops for leaders and teams, page turning books, online courses, and enlightening leadership development retreats. There are so many ways that we can work together to take your leadership to the next level. For more information, check out the show notes and let's do this together. One small brave move at a time. See you next week.